The Supreme Court just ruled 5-3 to allow police to use in court evidence that they gathered illegally. Not allegedly illegally, but if the court knows that it was gathered when it shouldn't have been, it will still be admissible in court. Now, at the very least, the dissenting liberal justices, of which there were 3 in this case, 1 siding with the conservative majority, did have a very strong response. And we're going to have sections from Sonia Sotomayor's response. But first, I want to give you details about the case that led to this Supreme Court decision. Police spied on a South Salt Lake City home after receiving an anonymous tip about drug activity. When Joseph Edward Streif, the defendant in the case, walked out of the house, a police detective illegally stopped him, questioned him, and checked his name in a police database. The police officer saw that Streif had a small traffic warrant out for him. He therefore arrested Streif and illegally searched him, finding methamphetamine in his pocket. Utah subsequently charged Streif with illegal drug possession. Now, in this particular case, the defense argued that that evidence was gathered illegally, and the judge bought it. They go up a level, they continue to buy it. It eventually gets appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that is where it finally gets struck down, and they are allowed to use that evidence in court. But as I said, Sonia Sotomayor had a very strong defense of your Fourth Amendment protections against these sorts of illegal searches and seizures of meth in this particular case. And
before we go to Sotomayor, who had a brilliant response in her dissent, I want to point out the context here. Even the Utah Supreme Court unanimously said this is obviously a violation of your rights. If the Fourth Amendment means anything, it means that I can't unreasonably search you when you didn't do anything wrong.
Stop you for no reason.
Right, and that's what they did. They stopped the guy with, and they admit it. They admit that they stopped the guy illegally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
now,
I just saw the graphic in the background. I was smiling. That's amazing.
So Stephen Breyer, who's supposed to be one of the liberal justices, joins the conservative justices. That's why the Supreme Court goes in a conservative direction, overturns the Utah Supreme Court and says, your rights, I'm not that interested. Now,
I love that that's a conservative direction, because you'd think, I mean, plain language of the amendment, you're supposed to be protected from illegal searches and seizures. What part of the plain language of that was so obtuse and difficult to interpret for the conservative justices?
No, and you know, you hear from conservatives politically that they care about the Constitution, Constitution, and they're strict constructionists, and they're the plain reading of the language, etc. And here, the conservatives on the court were like, yeah, we didn't mean any of that. We were just kidding around. I just wanted to punish people. And usually this goes against minorities. This happens to be a white guy, but we know how it's going to be used. Anyway, take the race part of it out, although you shouldn't, as Sotomayor points out. You're powerless. This is going to be used against you a lot more than if you're powerful.
Yeah.
And the conservatives thought, nah, Constitution, plain reading, don't care, don't give a damn. But what frustrates me even more is Stephen Breyer going over the conservatives, because, yes, in the old days, sometimes Republican presidents would nominate liberal, conservative, people they thought were conservative justices who would then later become liberal, like Souter was famously, all right? But now, no, the conservatives pick the most conservative justices in the country, and then the Democrats go, no, don't worry, we'll be fair and reasonable, and we'll pick largely corporatist but liberal justices. Sotomayor, obviously a great example in this case, right? Kagan was, and Sotomayor was the least corporatist of them all. Kagan, fairly corporatist. Ginsburg was in the day. Breyer was in the day. And that's why we have a court that has agreed with the Chamber of Commerce and been more, quote unquote, pro-business, pro-corporate than any court in U.S. history. Now, this is not about corporations, but even so, one of the liberal justices goes over the conservative side anyway, because we have an uneven playing field. Because the Republicans pick the most conservative and the Democrats pick the most conservative of their choices, oftentimes. And by the way, the one that they have now proposed, Merrick Garland, is far more conservative than Breyer. On civil rights issues, he says you don't even have a right to due process. He's ruled that habeas corpus does not have to be applied by the government in the Guantanamo case. The conservative Supreme Court overruled Merrick Garland, the new Democratic appointee, who's so conservative, he's more conservative than this court, okay?
Well, he's still more liberal than all of the conservative justices.
No,
maybe not on this particular issue.
No, I don't grant that.
I've seen judicial, like, they've broken down all of his votes, and you can plot out, he would be the most conservative out of the liberal justices, but he would still be far to the left of the most liberal conservative justice.
No, on some of the issues, but in money in politics
I know, I'm not saying
and
he's
on due
liberal on every
process
issue,
and
I'm saying
civil
overall.
rights, I argue he's just as conservative as the most conservative justices. You can't get any more conservative than I don't believe in habeas corpus. I don't believe that you have to present
Maybe he doesn't
a
know what it
defendant
stands
in
for.
front of a judge. You can't get any more conservative than that. And so, but overall, it still proves the point no matter what. The Democrats go all the way to the right. The Republicans go all the way to the right in their own spectrums, right?
Yeah.
And you have a court that is massively right-wing.
I mean, look, we got Sotomayor and Kagan, like, who are not perfect justices, obviously, but they are liberals.
Yes.
For the most part.
For the most part.
For the
So
most part.
now, having said all that, remember, we lost. Now the Fourth Amendment no longer means that you are free from unreasonable searches and seizures. You're not anymore. Now, having said that, now let us give credit to Sotomayor, who is an actual progressive.
Exactly.
And who fought hard on this, even in her loss.
Okay, so here are a few sections of her remarks. Do not be soothed by the opinion's technical language. This case allows the police to stop you on the street, demand your identification, and check it for outstanding traffic warrants, even if you were doing nothing wrong. If the officer discovers a warrant for a fine you forgot to pay, courts will now excuse his illegal stop and will admit into evidence anything he happens to find by searching you after arresting you on the warrant. Now, to the point that we made about the disproportionate use of this against the powerless, and especially in the American context against racial minorities, it is no secret that people of color are disproportionate victims of this type of scrutiny. For generations, black and brown parents have given their children the talk, instructing them never to run down the street, always keep your hands where they can be seen, do not even think of talking back to a stranger, all out of fear of how an officer with a gun will react to them. By legitimizing the conduct that produces this double consciousness, this case tells everyone, white and black, guilty and innocent, that an officer can verify your legal status at any time. It says that your body is subject to invasion while courts excuse the violation of your rights. It implies that you are not a citizen of a democracy, but the subject of a carceral state just waiting to be cataloged.
Strong words. Love those words. But she goes further. And the reason why I like this is because I feel like this is Sotomayor planting the flag and saying, yeah, goddamn right I'm a progressive. And it's refreshing to find one on the court. So she quotes Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. She quotes Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me. She quotes James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time. James Baldwin now more storied than the other two, but for her to say, yeah, that's right, I am quoting liberal books because they are correct, and they have a correct assessment of history. Then she goes on to say words that I'm not sure others have noticed as much, and I just want to make sure to point them out. She said, we must not pretend that the countless people who are routinely targeted by police are isolated. They are the canaries in the coal mine whose deaths, civil and literal, warn us that no one can breathe in this atmosphere. So that's a reference, in my opinion, to Eric Garner, I can't breathe. Okay, and she's saying...
Pretty beautiful.
Yeah, and it was and beautifully put, touching. And then she said she defended the people who were, quote, routinely targeted by the police and argued, quote, until their voices matter too, our justice system will continue to be anything but. So to me, that is a reference to Black Lives Matter. So she has put all of that in the dissent to this case. I think that is her way of saying, yeah, I got it. Fox News will be opposed to this. I got it. The Democratic establishment will say, well, oh, wait a minute now. Are you sure you want to do that? I mean, Michelle Alexander is considered really liberal, and I mean, you can't even opaquely mention Black Lives Matter or Eric Garner. And this is Sotomayor saying, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a Supreme Court justice, and I have lifetime tenure, so I could do whatever I damn well please, and I wish that the other so-called progressives on the court would realize that and understand who they're supposed to be serving, which is the entirety of the American people and not just the benefactors of the politicians who put them there.